I want to welcome you guys first off to our webinar, and I'll explain the Lederhosen right now, okay? Because I know people are, hey, Chris, what's up, man? Good seeing you, dude. So I'll explain the Lederhosen real quick. So basically, our company has a happy hour, and I decided as a joke to wear Lederhosen and drink out of a beer stein for our virtual happy hour. And I kind of goaded Julian into wearing his Lederhosen as well during this virtual happy hour. So he left and he changed into it because I didn't even know if he had one. And then I told him, well, we have to wear Lederhosen for our next webinar. And so that was the plan, was to wear Lederhosen for this next webinar. But Julian, biking to work in pouring rain in Missouri, did not bring his Lederhosen with him. And so I'm going to carry it solo. So here's my Lederhosen. I'm going to present this entire webinar in my Lederhosen, and that's okay. I'm totally comfortable in it, and we can go on. Okay? So there's the Lederhosen story. This is authentic Lederhosen. I bought it for my daughter's first birthday when we did a Oktoberfest style birthday for her. Birthday is actually on Wednesday. She's turning 5. And we did Victoria Fest, and it was awesome. And so that's why I own Lederhosen. I don't know why Julian does, but that's my story.
I'm German. That's
okay.
That's the only explanation.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's go ahead and get this thing started. Again, questions, please ask them chat or in the Q&A, and we will get to them. We'll take you off mute. We will have to chat with you about it. And let's just go ahead and present. So welcome to our webinar, Content Marketing Secrets Revealed. I'm going to try to turn presentation on here. There we go. That's it. There we are. How to make content your audience will love at scale, because frankly, we all know making content is hard. You spend a lot of time to make one piece of content, and you just hope your audience likes it or finds it, or you email it out to them and you put it once on your LinkedIn. And then, that's kind of it, right? You share it maybe a couple more times and then just kind of loses legs. And so that's frustrating, right? I hate to make content that way. And so we've kind of developed a formula here at Gorilla by which we do with our clients. And then I've also developed this formula out of Corbinzo, our work before. And so we're going to show you kind of how to make content in a much more efficient, scalable manner in multiple asset types, and then it can help you across multiple mediums. And so that's basically the crux of the webinar. And so first, let me start by introducing ourselves. My name is Matt Schinella, the non-German in the Lederhosen, senior strategist at Gorilla 76. And Julian, you can introduce yourself real quick. But basically, we help B2B manufacturers generate new business through marketing, help you guys expand your market, get in front of your audience, and bring marketing sourced revenue to your company. That's kind of our goal. Julian, introduce yourself.
All right. Picture of me was with a little more hair back in the day, but I've been with Gorilla for a little over 3 years, I think. We're coming up on 3 years. Worked with 15 or so industrial companies in that time. So all the stuff that's in here was through lots of failure and learning. But we feel like we're in a good place to share this with you guys. So I'm excited to get started.
All right. So we're going to cover, first we'll kind of go more high level, like what makes content good. Because, there's definitely varying opinions on that. Content pillars, which is going to be kind of what we get into the, scaling of content. I'm going to tell you why you should probably focus on one, at least to start out with. And then we'll show you the waterfall, which is basically how to multiply your content pillar to make all those additional assets. And then I'll give you some practical examples, both in the industrial and not in the industrial space. We'll talk distribution, so how to get your content in front of your audience, measurement, because none of this matters if you can't analyze it. And then we'll do Q&A. So if you have questions in the chat or put them in the questions panel within Zoom. And then I want to bring people on live, and we can just kind of talk about it more in a conversational tone, because I think it's really boring to have people type questions, then we answer them. So if you have a mic, I want to bring you on and just chat with you. All right. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Julian. Julian's going to handle these first, and then I will jump in. So Julian, the floor is yours, sir.
Sweet. Jump in. All right. So let's answer the first question. It's a very basic one, but why content? Why are we doing content marketing? Well, I think the most important fact here is that, and I think a lot of people throw out this number, but 95% of your audience is not ready to buy. So you can't talk about yourself all of the time. I think there's a time and place to talk about yourself and educate people about your product. But most of these people that you're marketing to, they're not ready to make a purchase. They're not looking to make a purchase right now. So why hit them with a sales message? Instead, what you want to do is you want to build trust with these people by helping them. And by helping them, I mean by giving them content that helps them solve a problem, helps them become better at what they do. And when they are ready to buy, which might not be so long, might just be a couple of months, some people might already be ready, they will come to you first. They will think of you first, and they'll be sold on you already because they, just think of what we're doing in this webinar. It's no secret that all we're trying to do is help. Obviously, if one of you guys wants to work with us, that's great. But I think what happens with content marketing is when people are ready to buy and they are looking for an agency, and in your case, they're looking for an industrial product, they've been consuming our content or your content for months, maybe years. And who will they think of first? They'll think of us, the industrial marketing agency, and they'll think of you guys, the manufacturer that makes the product that they need. So that's why content. Now, this is another big one. What makes great content? And I think it boils down to just three things. Just to really simplify it, I think good content or great content is helpful, specific, and entertaining. And I think the best of the best content out there is all three of them. That's kind of the top 1%, if you want to call it that. The stuff that I want to listen to after work because it doesn't feel like work. It just feels like entertainment. But yeah, so let's just talk about helpful for a second. The primary purpose of content is to help the audience. You're not trying to sell them anything. Again, what we're trying to do in this webinar is not selling. We're just trying to be helpful. So that's one thing. Number two is it's very specific. It's written for a specific role. So for a design engineer, for a manufacturing engineer, for the purchasing department, it's written for EHS. And for those people, you're solving a specific problem or you're providing a unique idea. And you're not writing brochure fluff that is a lot of words but doesn't say a whole lot. And the last one that Matt and I talked about this earlier, but we think this is the hardest one to pull off. Great content is entertaining. So reading, watching, or listening does not feel like a chore. Again, and that's the stuff I mean. That's what I mean when I talk about. That's the kind of stuff I listen to after work or before work because it doesn't feel like a chore. There's a lot of different content out there that really does not apply to this, but there's a few select ones that are entertaining. And I think what's really difficult about this is almost like media chops that you got to have here. So we're talking about being a really good writer, or the people who are really good at editing videos that get millions of views on YouTube. Like that's entertaining, and that's really hard to do. There aren't a lot of those people. So trying to do this with a small marketing team is just really challenging. But yeah, these are the three pillars, if you want to call it that make great content.
It's not challenging. Actually, it just frankly kind of sucks. I mean,
what's that?
It basically kind of sucks. I mean, making entertaining content is, I think a lot of people equate entertainment with being funny.
Yes.
Or being something where you have to really get a rise out of your audience. And I think being entertaining, actually, there's like a misconception with that. I think you just have to authentically be yourself and be genuine when you're out there, whether you're on video or whether you're on a webinar like you are right now or on a podcast or whatever it is. And I think it just takes being yourself over and over and over again, building that muscle, building trust, and building an intimacy with your audience. And I'm kind of giving the goose away here when we're talking about what I'm going to be presenting on, but to me, that's what being entertaining is. Like, I don't think Rand Fishkin is very funny, but I think Rand is incredibly entertaining because he's so straightforward and poignant with the way that he presents on content, and that resonates with me. So I find him to be irresistibly entertaining because he's so authentic and disarming. So entertainment does not mean funny. You can be anything. You can just be yourself. Same way you'd be with your spouse or with your friends, and people are going to find that entertaining. Someone's going to find it entertaining. Don't worry about being entertaining to everyone. Worry about being entertaining to your audience and the people you're trying to reach. And that's really all you got to care about. There's always going to be someone out there who's frankly hating on the stuff that you're throwing out there.
Yeah, that's a really good addition, Matt.
All right. So common call content pillars and why you should focus on what. And so so I think first I want to define for you guys what is a content pillar, because that tends to get I think people look at content pillars as like almost like topics. Like people think of the HubSpot model of like content hubs, where it's like, let's pick this seed keyword and then let's do all this content around it. And that's really not what I'm talking about when I'm thinking about content pillar. Those are more like pillar pages. And so when I'm thinking content pillar, I'm thinking of long form content that you can do over and over and over again, and then realize ways to make additional content out of it. So when I think of content pillar, I think of three in particular. I think of webinars, what we're doing right here, where it's me and Julian talking to you, presenting on a topic, speaking kind of ad hoc, going over what we feel, our approach on the market, our approach on content marketing, where we feel it is right now, where we feel it was, and where we feel it's going. That's something I'll go ahead and just give credit. This is what Joe Mullings posted on LinkedIn, and it couldn't have been more right. Like that's what really great thought leadership is. It's knowing where your market was, where it is, and where it's going. And so when you're thinking about content, I love thinking about it that way. That's kind of why we're here. I'm talking about where I feel content is going, and it's going to go in this direction. There's already people who are doing this now. They're early adopters, and just like everything, it's a bell curve. And so other people are going to pick this up. So the other one is a video series. I know you guys are thinking, oh, well, we do video right now. Well, do you do video kind of in the way that is episodic? And we'll get into episodic in a little bit, but video is the other sort of long form thing. I think a lot of people try to make 1, 2, 3 minute videos. Instead, see if you can go deeper. See if you can make that 9, 10, 11, 12 minute video that goes deeper into a topic, and then you can figure out how to make other content out of it. And then lastly is podcasting. Podcasting is probably the hardest for people to grasp, because it's difficult to attribute. And people are like, well, isn't podcasting just for like, media personalities and sportscasters and Joe Rogan and people like that? No, you can actually do a very effective content pillar series out of podcasts. You just have to figure out the right angle, the right topic, and kind of what you want to do with it. There's a lot of great resources for that. I'll walk through some of them, and then I'll give some examples of how this is done in a good way. So maybe you're looking at this and you're thinking, well, which one is best suited for me? For my company. So I kind of think about it in a few different ways. Like who do I have in house? How much time is it going to take? And what skills do I actually have? So if your webinar, I would do a webinar series if you have a very technical product or solution, if you have ample in-house subject matter experts and subject matter expertise commitment. And I'll tell you why, because the biggest part of the webinar, the most successful part of the webinar, is your Q&A. And you can't fake it in a question and answer, because you will get exposed. And so that's where you're going to need your subject matter expert with decades of experience to be able to answer an off the cuff question. I think that's where that's really where the contenders and the pretenders get exposed in a webinar format. Also, very consultative sales process, because I think there's a certain level of detail where you have to get like audio and visual, but then also very much explanatory, kind of in the moment with your audience in the webinar. That's why I'm a big fan of that. Video series, I think when you have a very visual product, if it's more tactile, where people kind of see what it look like, what would it feel like, I think that's where video series really shines. You have to have in-house expertise to execute. Yes, you can get started with like an iPhone and some cheap audio, but if you really want to do a video series, you're going to have to invest in some equipment, and you're going to have to invest in someone who knows how to edit. And then also, if you have a YouTube heavy audience, which there's plenty of manufacturing niches that have that's where I think video really shines for you. And podcasts, I think podcasts are more accounts focused. So if you're looking at, a certain number of accounts within your industry and you want to try to go right after them, the best thing you do with a podcast is go invite your customers that you want on your podcast to talk about what they do. And then the other thing you could do is obviously let your subject matter experts shine as well. And then I think podcasts can be a more marketer focused and led content production, because a marketer, you can approach that with some curiosity. You can play dumb a little bit and just ask them general questions. And also podcast, so good for market research on top of getting content out there in an efficient manner. So these are why I think I love these three pillars, and why I think everyone in this audience, one of these would work really well for your company. It's just on you to figure out which one, and you can ask questions about that if you want, but that's kind of my take on that. So I would focus on one pillar because of time. You can't dedicate enough time to multiple efforts, and when you spread your efforts thin, all your efforts get mediocre, and so your improvement doesn't get there, right? It's a muscle. Each of those three things is a muscle, and you got to build it up, and you will get much, much better at it. And then once you build that muscle up, think about like working out, then you can go move to like the next muscle group. So that's kind of why I feel that competency, like I said, build that muscle, and then repetition, episodic content, like I said, is the key. Your audience builds an expectation of seeing you. So if you're in the same place constantly churning the same kind of content out, and you're consistent about it, you'll build following and trust. And also, like, when not everyone's going to be in a buying mode when they find your content, but when they do, you're going to find they're going to consume a lot of content. And that's kind of the Netflixing of content in today's day and age. So I mean, I'll give you an example, not B2B, but I mean, there's absolute parallel. Like yesterday I decided to randomly, it was Sunday morning, I found Emily in Paris on Netflix, and I just started going through 6 episodes of it because I was like, okay, well, whatever, I'm in. And if I was in a B2B buying mode, I've done that too. I found a business podcast on marketing, like the Stated Demand Gen from Chris Walker. And I was like, okay, I'm hooked on this. I started listening to just 6 straight. Or How I Built This from Guy Raz. I found that. And I started listening to like 20 of them because it was very relevant to my business and I was learning stuff. So when you think about episodic content, just remember that repetition is what gets people to binge on it, which is inevitably what happens in how people consume content today. And when you have that muscle that you're working over time, people will get really intimate and familiar with your company. And then you're going to build a lot of know, like, trust as a result. So content waterfall, here's how you multiply your efforts. This is where the magic happens. Like that episodic content, that webinar, that video series, that podcast, it's one piece of a puzzle. It's one piece. So you can make multiple content assets out of your one long form content piece. So if it's a webinar, video, podcast, take that transcription and recording, and then you can make a blog post, videogram, audiogram. And so the reason why that works is because you have your one long form, you have your blog post for SEO and for like smaller distributions for people who prefer to read. And then you have your video and audiograms, perfect for distributing on social, whether that's on LinkedIn or on Instagram stories or wherever it is your audience resides. I've seen really clever companies utilize video and audiograms on their websites as well. And I think that's a great strategy too for people who just go direct to your website afterwards.
Hey, Matt, can I stop you for just a second and just back up for a little bit?
Yeah.
And Joe's got a question too. So we got to get to that because he's the boss.
That's good. I see the question on what's a video or audiogram. I'm going to get into that in 2 slides if you can hang with me on that.
I was just going to back up a little bit, Matt, just on the content pillar. So, what we talked about in the beginning is the goal of this is not to sell, and we're trying to build trust with people through content, and we're trying to be helpful, right? That doesn't happen if you put out one blog post once a month. So what Matt is really trying to get at is how can you put out a lot of content and quality content too, with minimal effort. And the point that we're trying to make is just pick one of these pillars that Matt is talking about here. Pick a webinar, pick a video series or a podcast, and do one of them really well, and then run through this content waterfall that Matt is talking about. And to give you a little bit of context for how this might work is, let's say you're trying to break into the food manufacturing space, or it's a key market for you, and you're selling to let's say project engineers in the food manufacturing space. So what you might want to do is start a podcast where you host project engineers in the food manufacturing space once a week, maybe more often if you can. Talk to them for 30 minutes, and each conversation you're going to turn into audiograms, videograms, and articles, and all this micro content, is if you want to call that. So that once you have all this content, you can be in front of those people almost every day, because that's the key. Once they start seeing your stuff every day, or let's say once a week, that's where you start building trust and brand recognition. That's when these people will come to you first because they've heard of you a million times when they have a need. So just to back up a little bit, and Matt, you want to tackle Joe's question, or wait on that for a second?
I'm going to wait on it, Joe. Sorry. We'll get to it in 2 slides, I promise. So multiply your efforts. You create multiple from a single asset. The big thing is actually, though, you reduce time commitment from your subject matter expert. Because if you can get your guy to do 2 webinars a month with you, and then you can create 25 pieces of content from it, guess what? Your subject matter expert doesn't have to use any more of their time to create a lot more content. And that is basically that's the holy grail if you're a marketer, because you're probably 1 or 2 people, maybe you're 3, and you're like, how the hell am I going to make a lot of this stuff quickly and get it out? That's how. It also lets you hit multiple mediums and channels simultaneously. All that stuff is good on across a variety of channels, whether it's SEO for Google search or video for LinkedIn or whatever. So you'll have it if you're doing the video series, YouTube for SEO as well. The one thing I like about the webinar particularly is that it actually is the most repurposable of all the content. And that's because it's really easy to take your webinar transcript like we're doing right now and turn it into a podcast, because it just creates a little bit of editing. And then you're essentially you're making 2 long forms of content, and then you're still able to make the same amount of micro content as a result. So that's why I am extremely big fan of the webinar series. Even if you only get 10 or 15 people to attend your webinar, like it's a piece of a larger puzzle, which I think is important to keep in mind, because you're going to take that and you're going to cut it up into a lot of different assets. And that's really the main point of it. So I'm going to give you an example for each of these. So I'll be real fast about this because I want to be mindful of your time. I did this at Abacore Binzel. We did this webinar series. Here was one of our webinars, source capture theme extraction for beginners. And so the webinar, I ended up putting it up here, and then hold on. I'm not going to play this webinar. I'm not going to play a webinar in a webinar. That would be silly. And then from there, you can make, 1, 2 blogs, 3 blogs. So we took this webinar, which was, an hour, but it was like 30 minutes presenting, 30 minutes Q&A. We took those Q&A questions, we turned blog posts out of them, and they become additional assets for us. And then I basically took what Etienne, who was my subject matter expert, talked about. I took his whole transcription, and we had 3 blogs out of it. So 1 blog, 2 blogs, 3 blogs. They were all optimized for SEO, explaining this, what is this, etc. And then we were able to take his audio or his video, and we made like 5 or 6 audiograms out of it. But here's an example of what an audiogram is. It's basically this little square thing with the transcript and like a hook headline. And then you get people in your content stream, and they're engaging with your content and watching it. So like this little trinket here ended up getting over 1,000 views, which we extracted from this webinar. So this one webinar creates all these different pieces of content, and that's in a nutshell how that works.
And back up on it. Go back to this LinkedIn post for a sec, Matt, because I think that's actually amazing. Like how much time did you guys spend making this clip? Like an hour? Half an hour?
Like 30 minutes to an hour. Like the hardest part is building the template, and then it's just come up with the highline, and then most of these softwares just do the transcription for you, and so you have to make a few edits, and then you're done.
All right. So here's something to think about for everyone watching. Writing a blog post takes us about 8 hours. You can do it in half, maybe, if the subject matter is already there with the writer and they're quick. But 4 hours, and making this video just took Matt and his crew, maybe 30 minutes. It got 1,000 views, and if you write a blog post and put it on LinkedIn, it's not going to go nowhere near as far unless you put a lot of paid spend behind it. So it's just about being efficient, just spending very little time, still providing value, but getting 1,000 of the right people to look at your stuff.
Yeah. Cindy, I see your question, and I'll answer it right now. So you build this in the Videogram for that matter. There's a bunch of different softwares that you can do it in. They're like $10 a month. So Wave, Splashio, Veed, VEED is the other one. We have links to all of those at the end of our presentation, so you can check them all out. Yeah, of course, you're welcome. I knew we'd get the question, so I wanted to make sure we had it for you. But to piggyback on Julian's point, the point of your content is to be consumed. So the more ways you allow it to be consumed, the better. So that's kind of where I would be thinking is like, what's the optimal way I could get as much content consumption as possible? Ram Fishkin, who I mentioned earlier, he created probably the best video series ever. It literally grew his company up to $50 million a year. It's Moz, and the video series is called Whiteboard Friday. You can find it on YouTube. It's all about search engine optimization. He basically takes his 9-minute video. It's a whiteboard video. This is what every single one of his videos look like. He transcribes the whole thing into a blog post. And then there's nothing stopping him, if you wanted to, from basically taking 30 minutes, 30 seconds to 1 minute clips out of that and making audio and videograms and distributing them over social channels. I mean, this is a little bit before that kind of was a thing, but absolutely nothing precluding them from doing that. Our own example at Gorilla, we use this, the manufacturing executive, which is our founder, Joe Sullivan's podcast. He basically takes his podcast with his interview with his person, and he makes audio and videograms and blog posts out of it. So the transcription basically is what becomes the blog post. So here's what he does: podcast, article, and then he makes multiple content assets out of it and then dishes it out on LinkedIn. So that's from his personal profile as well as from his from the Gorilla profile as well. So that in a nutshell is the waterfall, and that's why I'm such a big proponent of it. I would be making it a pillar, for lack of a better term, of my content strategy for 2021, because it's so efficient. Like when I figured this out, like my life literally changed in how I made content. I was able to move so much faster, and I got my subject matter experts pumped to do this stuff because I was asking them to spend a lot less time working with me to make a lot more content. All right, Julian, I'll hand it off to you.
All right. Most important point. Content without distribution is pointless. If you're making content and none of your audience is seeing it, it's not worth a whole lot. So you got to start thinking, if you're not thinking about this yet, you got to start thinking about, how do I get my content in front of the right people? So whoever you made it for, how do you get that person to read it? And that kind of hits on that first point. Content marketing is not SEO. There's some exceptions where you've got long tail keywords that you might be able to hit, and you might be writing content that is keyword targeted. But most of the time, the technical stuff that you guys will be writing about is not written for SEO. And if you wait for people to find it through search engines, you're going to have to wait a really long time, and it's probably not going to happen. So you have, go ahead.
100% correct.
What's that?
That's 100%, 1000% correct. Like, trust me, like we've looked at a lot of our clients' tools for what SEO traffic looks like. In a lot of spaces, it's simply not there. But your audience is definitely on other channels, and you can go find them there. Anyway,
exactly. So you'll see I've got a lot of different channels listed here. But before I go through these, let's start with this. Think about which channel is best for you. And I would use 3 guiding questions. There's probably a lot more you can be asking yourselves, but number one, where's your audience? Are they on LinkedIn? Are they on Facebook? Those are 2 big ones, but that's where I would start. Where is your audience? And they're probably on a lot of the big ones that you see listed here, but there might be some audiences that are difficult to reach through LinkedIn, where you got to find something, maybe some niche community that you want to distribute it through. Second one, think about what are your strengths. So are you really good at producing content for social? So, if that's the case, if you're exceptional at producing content that performs really well in social, that might be your place to go. So think about that. What are your strengths? Third, what's your budget? If you don't, what I'm getting at here is, if you don't have any budget for distributing, you probably want to stick with the free options here. So, and most important point, pick the most important channels and go deep. So do those really well. Pick a few, do those really well. As opposed to picking all of them and trying to do all of them well. But let's look at some of the free ones. So free, your personal LinkedIn. You can do unpaid partnerships, so you can try pitching guest blogs to publications and they distribute it for you. You can distribute it through your own email list, which is virtually free. You can post it on YouTube, optimize for keywords in YouTube, and hope people find it. Might be a good strategy in some cases. Again, SEO is an opportunity sometimes, depending on what you're writing about. You got some paid channels. You got the big ones are paid social. So LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, where you can put money behind this and promote your content so the right people see it. We'll talk about that in 2 weeks, by the way, on our next webinar on how to do that. You can do paid partnerships, so you can pay publications to put your stuff on their newsletters, for example, prominently place it on their homepage. That can be kind of expensive in times, but something to consider if you have a very niche audience that's pretty hard to target. Let's just check out a few examples of this.
Run with it.
Cool. All right. So first one under free I listed is your personal LinkedIn, or there's also an example of a company LinkedIn on here. So what you're seeing is some of my favorite marketers, and Joe is on here too. So
Joe is also one of our
props to
favorite.
you, Joe. You're my favorite marketer. um, so we've got Dave Gerhardt on here, which if you guys don't follow him yet, thanks, Joe. If you guys don't follow him yet, you definitely should. We've talked about him a few times before. He posts on his personal LinkedIn. All he does right here on the left is he pulls probably a minute snippet or so from his podcast, and he puts subtitles on it and a headline. And that 30 minutes of work gets Dave, if you look at the bottom here, almost 4,500 views. So just tiny amount of work and a lot of additional value for him. On the right, you see Joe doing the same thing, pulling a snippet from the podcast and getting 1,000 views. So again, for Joe, very little time investment, but 1,000 of those 1,000 people, there's probably a few hundred who are ideal buyers who are watching a minute video of Joe without us paying anything for it. And you might be wondering, can you do this on your company page? I haven't seen it been done well a whole lot, but there's a few companies that do it well. One of them is Gong. Matt had a comment on that earlier that they're a unicorn, so maybe not the best comparison, but it can be done. So all Gong does, I think they started out just posting some pretty in-depth research about sales, and then they just post daily. They post good content daily, and people love it, and they engage with it, and they don't pay anything for it except for the work that goes into it.
They're also entertaining. I mean, which again, like it's hard for a company LinkedIn page to be entertaining because corporate CI and all that other stuff. But boy, if you could figure out a way to make your company page entertaining, you probably got something there.
So, all right, question. How do you know that LinkedIn video views are from people in your target market? On organic, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of gut feeling. You'd have to check I think you can get some analytics on who viewed it, some companies, but you probably have to check out, who's liking and who's commenting. And the chances are that the people watching are similar people, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, what are the chances someone not in your target market is going to care about your content? I would say probably not high, especially if it's a company page, but if it's your personal page, I mean, you can just look at the people who interact with your content, who likes it and who comments on it, and then use that sample as representative of everyone who consumes it. So if you have a personal post and you get 10 likes and 3 comments and they all look like they fit your target market, and then you have 550 views of it, I'd be very confident those 550 views rested within my target market. So I would simply just use the law of samples and let that kind of be my barometer as whether or not my target market's watching it. There's no perfect way, Cindy, to attribute that. Whether you used a paid channel or any other channel, you're trusting the algorithm, and then you're also trusting how focused your content is.
Sweet. Another question here. How do you proactively build your audience on LinkedIn? That's a good one. Connect with active, engaging LinkedIn users, build through content and time. Matt, I know you have a lot of thoughts on that, so let me just throw out one and then I'll let you go. You look like you're ready.
I know.
All right. So definitely proactively build. Don't wait for it to happen. One thing that we do for this webinar, for example, so we're going to pull back the curtains. If you guys find this creepy, I apologize. But what we do for this webinar is we pull the list of attendees and we find LinkedIn profiles, and then we connect with you guys because we want to keep sharing content with you. We want you guys to keep showing up, and we want to interact with you. So that's about 30 new connections for us, 20, 30 new connections for us that we proactively build. Then you can do stuff like, whenever you do post, look at the people who are liking it. Are you connected with them? If not, go connect with them. Look at people who are targeting a similar audience like you are. When those people post, who's liking their posts? Can you connect with those people? And then there's probably a few more ideas from you, Matt. What do you think?
I would say go comment on other people's posts often, get involved in conversations, and don't just post for the sake of posting. Like really thoughtfully respond to comments and participate in discussions on posts for people, especially if you can find someone in your space who is, doing really well. So like if you find Jake Hall, the manufacturing millennial, MJ Peters, like there's people in the industrial space who really, really do well on like LinkedIn, for instance. Go find the stuff they post and go participate in their content, because you'll get the network effect of essentially, being an active participant and respondent to comments, and then you'll get trusted more when you post stuff yourself. So you have to work both of those muscles in parallel. So most of when you start posting on LinkedIn, you're not going to get anyone liking your stuff really to start with. Also, look at hashtags. I know people think hashtags are overrated, but I actually think hashtags have value on LinkedIn, because there is because frankly there are hashtags that people pay attention to on LinkedIn. One for sure is careers or job advice. You can look at marketing is one as well. And so I would kind of start broad and then focus in, but I would also make sure like only use like 3 or 4 hashtags to use in your posts, and make sure they are hyper relevant to what you're posting about. Get broad and then get specific. It's an Instagram strategy as well. But I would also just use hashtags in your posting as well. But there's really no other way, to Blake's question about building your audience, without participating as someone who comments on other people's posts and then posting yourself. You do both of those in parallel and give it time and be persistent, and frankly show a little resiliency when it doesn't work for you after 60 days. You're going to end up building an audience, and how big an audience you should have should be what's relevant to you. Not everyone needs or wants a 50,000 person audience. Sometimes if you have I'd rather have an engaged audience of 2,500 people than 50,000 people and only a few of them respond to my stuff. So make sure that your audience is a relative size. It's a vanity metric when it comes down to it. I'm much more worried about how many people participate and engage in my content as opposed to how many people follow me. So that's another important point, in my opinion, to keep in mind.
Hey, Matt, one more question about posting on company pages versus individual pages. I think the question is, what are your recommendations for the role where you should be posting from? So basically, who in the company should be posting this content? And I'll just let you go on this one.
Ooh, me? Man, so this is actually a complicated question. It should honestly be who's the most creative person in your company, and I would kind of leave it in their hands. I'm assuming, Cindy, you have a small marketing team. Maybe I'm mistaken. If you have a bigger team, let me know in the comments. But I would honestly let your most creative person kind of go wild on it, if it's your company account. What do you have to lose? I mean, ultimately, you want people to engage and find your stuff thoughtful, educational, and entertaining. And I would just sort of coach your most creative person on it and just say, look, man, we're going to give you a lot of leeway to build our audience up. Oh, your personal account. Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, I think that's the question you were answering, Matt.
If you're using personal accounts to post, recommendations on the role of who should be posting from. So does it make sense for the marketing person to post to people's personal accounts, I guess is your question? No. If that's the question, I would coach maybe if it's your CEO or your president or your subject matter expert, I would coach them. I actually did this for one of my sales guys when I was at Binzel. So this is a really good question. So I had a guy, Kenny, and Kenny was new in a territory. He was in Texas. And he knew nobody in Texas. So he was like, man, how do I use LinkedIn to help me? And I'm like, well, all right, let me coach you a little bit. So I basically did a couple phone calls with him, and I came up with kind of like, we talked basically back and forth, like what matters in your market, your specific little micro territory market, your field market. And then, what are the things that we're trying to sell on there? And so I created a bank basically of like 25 LinkedIn posts for him to just sort of drip out. But he actually, I made him write them. I basically gave him the bones and said, you got to fill it out in your words. And so that's kind of what I did for him. And it ended up working pretty well. He got some good traction out of it. Ultimately, COVID hit and he wanted to stop posting. But we were about, 4 weeks into it, and he was getting up into the thousands of views, and he was getting, tens of comments on some of his stuff talking about dealer relationships with distributors and things of that nature. So I would say I would take a coaching approach to it. I would not post. I would not like ghost posts for people. I don't think that's going to work. Ideally, you want that person to be passionate enough about it to do it themselves. But in the absence of that, I think just kind of coaching them from behind. All right, go ahead, Julian.
All right. Let's see here. Partner distribution. So you can do two things for partner distribution. On the left, here's an example of what Drift is doing. They're a big software company, do a chatbot. And a lot of what they do is they partner with other organizations that are targeting the same audience, and they bring them on for webinars. So they do a webinar here. It's called Let's Sales Sell. And you might not be able to see the job titles here, but they're bringing on the a VP from Chorus AI, a VP or CRO from Inside Out, and a director of sales from Outreach. Those are all people who have the exact same audience as Drift. And by bringing these three people on, they are probably piggybacking off of their audience. So they're probably getting on their email list. These people are probably posting on their LinkedIn profile on behalf of Drift, and they're driving a lot of people to this webinar that Drift is having. And Drift is probably just going to provide value for 30 minutes and also talk about their product for 1 minute. And again, they'll probably have hundreds of people showing up without having to pay any money for paid distribution. Now, if you don't have access to this yet, or you're not quite there yet, you can also do this through paid. So this is just a screenshot of what we did with a client a few weeks ago. Basically, very, very small niche market in the medical device field, and really difficult to target through LinkedIn, difficult to target through partnerships. So what we did is we just asked a conference provider or the host of a conference in that niche if we could hop on their email list and if they'd be willing to promote a webinar for us. And they said, yeah, we can do that. We've got 18,000 people on our list, and you can pay us $1,500 for 2 emails, which is pretty pricey, but in that case, it was worth the money because there was just no other way of getting to those people. You keep going, Matt.
There we go.
Here we go. Paid social distribution. So basically, this is very much the same thing as what we just talked about for distribution through your personal profile. It looks the same. The only difference is you're putting money behind it. So you're just using LinkedIn ads to distribute content. In this case, on the left, the two left examples here. So the only difference is that little promoted note under the logo. But other than that, you're just putting money behind it. You can target the right companies, you can target job titles. And again, we'll talk about this more in 2 weeks, but basically you can just pay for an audience rather than building it through your personal profile. And just one YouTube example on the right. Basically, this is an example from Firetrace, who we talked about last time already, but they just do a great job in their marketing. So lots of examples there. But what they do is they take a case study that they put up on YouTube and they distribute it. So on YouTube pre-roll ads, what you can do basically is you can target based on keywords. So you can say, I want anyone looking for a fire suppression system to see this case study. Because chances are they're looking for one. And if we can show them this case study, we can show them that, here's a problem that we solved, and it's probably very similar to the one that you have right now.
Blake, I got your question, metrics you're tracking. So I would be looking for YouTube specifically. Julian, you could take the other ones. YouTube, you're paying pennies for the view. So anyone who's listening to this who's never done YouTube ads before, you pay YouTube literally every time someone watches your entire commercial, your entire pre-roll. So if they bounce out after those first 6 seconds, you actually don't pay for that, which is, pretty awesome. But it's also true though, you need your creative to kind of hit in order to get someone to watch your entire advertisement. But if you're looking at what Firetrace did there, 48,000 views, you're paying anywhere from 1 to 6 cents a view. So, it's not really that expensive when you break it down. How much am I willing to pay to get someone to watch an entire minute of my case study video? And then I always think of it compared to, well, how much would I pay to try to promote, like, look at this client we helped in my, industry trade shit in my industry magazine. And, all of a sudden that money makes a lot more sense to spend on YouTube. But, but yeah, Julian, you can go real quick through that, because I see questions are rolling in and I want to make sure we hit them.
Yeah, Blake, we've got more on metrics on at the end, but really quick, what we look at for if we promote video ads, we look at how much are we spending for our ICP to watch the whole video, and it's like $3 to $4. So it's a little bit gut feeling for us. Are we willing to pay $3 for a president of a manufacturing company to watch Joe speak for 60 seconds? Definitely yes. So it just kind of depends on what you're selling and at what price point. On the left, you see we're promoting a webinar. We just track like how much are we spending per registration, which is like $10 to $30. And then obviously you want to measure bottom line results too. We'll get to that in a sec. Right. This came quicker than I expected. All right, Blake, here's more on measurement. So we got two different categories here. So one is upstream and one is downstream. And what I mean by upstream is how are you measuring if your content is performing pretty much like at the content level, if that makes sense. And then downstream means how's the content that you're putting out, how is it affecting your bottom line? Because you want to measure both as best as you can. First of all, let's just jump into this. I don't want to rant on more theory, but hold on.
Do you want to go back?
Not yet. All right. So upstream, we've got a few quantitative metrics that you might want to look at. These really depend on what piece of content or what format you're measuring, but you could be measuring cost per completed view. You could be measuring cost per read article. If you're sending out emails, you might be looking at open rates. You might be looking at likes, comments, and views if you're putting content out on LinkedIn. So it just kind of depends. And those metrics you need to look at in context of the bigger picture. It's hard to say, my LinkedIn post got 1,000 views. Is that good or bad? Well, you got to trust your gut a little bit. If of those 1,000 views, there's 200 of your ICP. In our case, let's say presidents, VPs of marketing at manufacturing companies watching that video, are 200 or 300 views really great? Yes, absolutely. So again, trust your gut. And that kind of goes to the next point too. There's a lot of qualitative metrics that I think are almost more important when it comes to your content. So really just trust your gut. When you start hearing things like, I've been reading all your emails from sales conversations. So chat with your sales team and see if those things are happening. If your customers are saying, I saw your post on LinkedIn yesterday, it really got me thinking. If on your content, or if you get replies to your emails that are just positive, saying, thank you, this was really helpful, from the right people, that's how you know your content is working. And we see that stuff happening on our LinkedIn. We see it happening on our newsletters. And if you don't see that happening for you, then there might be a problem of not putting out the right content or not reaching the right people. And then downstream, you've got a few things here too. So how do you measure bottom line results? So if you do content marketing right, first of all, you should be seeing an increase of inbound SQL, so sales qualified leads. For us, that just means people that fit our ICP, that land in our HubSpot. For you, that definition might be a little more tight. We look at qualified pipelines. So how many opportunities are you generating that fit your ICP, that come through organic search or direct search? Next thing you want to look at, or another thing that you could measure, is sales cycle length. So usually what happens if you do content marketing right is sales cycles get a lot shorter, because by the time the people get to you, they're already bought in. They don't need any convincing, and the deals close faster. This is kind of a theory, but I think another thing that happens is better retention. So you can look at your customer life cycle and how long they stay with you. I think that content eliminates a lot of buyer's remorse and keeps adding value even when people sign on with you or buy from you. So those are four things of downstream metrics that you could be looking at. There's a lot more to this, but we want to keep this simple. All right, quick word on content mix. So what I mean by content mix is, there's some point where you should be talking about yourself. That's okay, but at first you want to land those three jabs. This is a quote from Gary Vee, but basically what this means, jab, 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 right hook, is that before you get to talk about yourself and before you get to sell, you got to land, which is the right hook. You got to land a couple of jabs. So the way to think about this is content marketing is the educational content that you put out there builds a base of trust, and you got to do that for a while to build trust with people. And when you've got that trust, then you can land that right hook and put your product information in front of them. Get a sales conversation started with them.
Oops. All right, so here's the resources. Let's get started on questions because I know Jennifer had one. And I kind of want to, let's see if I can find my stuff here. There's all my participants. And Jennifer, who has their hand raised? Alex has their hand raised. Alex, do you want to talk? You can just let us know in the chat. Jennifer, do you interview your SMEs, and how do you keep the conversation from getting technical and dry? And that is a great question because that can be hard. So sometimes you get fortunate and you have an SME who is entertaining. So Etienne, who I use very often for my content pieces, and when I was at Benzel, happened to be French Canadian, so that accent actually helped him because he sounded a little bit, foreign. He sounded foreign, obviously, a little entertaining, so that obviously helped with how people thought he was entertaining and engaging. I think honestly, keeping it from getting technical and dry has to do with the questions that you ask. So I would really think about not getting too specific with the questions, and I would try to stay broad. And I say to stay broad, not because you want your subject matter expert to give a boring response to your question, because you don't. But what you want to do is you want to give them space to sort of show off a little bit what they know. And if you keep it broad, they'll end up getting technical enough that they obviously showcase what they know without getting so far in the weeds that you have no idea what they're asking, and your audience, if they don't really know a lot about the topic, won't understand. So I think a lot of the times keeping the conversation from getting technical has to do with the line of questioning. In terms of keeping it dry, a couple tips. So one is really see if you can get your subject matter expert to laugh or smile before they answer a question. And I know that sounds kind of hokey, but if you can get them to laugh or tell them a joke before you get them to answer something on camera, they're actually going to have a little bit more effervescence to them when they're answering the question. I've deployed that tactic before, and it actually worked pretty well. So that's one thing I would do. And the other thing is just, they're going to be a little dry when it starts off with, quite honestly. It's, again, like I said earlier, it's a muscle that they're going to work. But if you know their personality kind of outside of being on camera or making content, you got to find a way to make that shine. So that's going to sometimes be finding the medium that they're most effective in. Sometimes that's going to mean like maybe you got to bring someone, maybe you got a moderator on camera with them so you can draw them out or something like that. But that's sort of how I would approach it. Yes, I do edit my podcast if they ramble or want to start over on a question. Absolutely. So that resource isn't on here, but I've edited all of my podcasts in iMovie on Apple, which is free, and it's pretty easy. You can just simply clip out what you want and then throw it in. And then if you need to, download like a transition soundbite to like use to transition if it's really awkward. Kathy, what if you do not have any SMEs? Kathy, can I bring you on? Cool. Let's go ahead and I want to kind of hear about your company and what you guys do. Oh, wrong Kathy. Sorry. This is the one I want allowed to talk. And hi, Kathy. Are you there?
I think I am. Am I here?
Yes, you are. Welcome.
All right.
Welcome to our webinar. Appreciate you being on.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So here's my challenge. The company I work for, we manufacture very large machines that bend sheet metal. So think of anything metal, furniture, facades, countertops, HVAC equipment, all of that stuff, anything with Bendit. The company's located in Italy, and our technical resources are Italian and over there. I'm in charge of North America marketing, so I do not have a good set of product marketers or subject matter experts that I could bring into an English audience.
Okay. Do you have anyone who could become one within your company or who has the aptitude for it?
It's kind of a challenge. And that's where developing content is so difficult, because I just don't have a go-to person who can help me out with all that content.
Got it. So this is exactly where I think a podcast would work really well as a content medium, because you could do it and simply approach it with a lot of curiosity. I would just simply interview your customers a little bit. And the cool thing about interviewing your customers is that you can get little testimonial sound bites out of it, which will be useful for you, because inevitably they'll talk to you about how they use sheet metal in their product, and they'll probably mention your company in it at some point in time, and what it's been like working with you guys. And then you can also interview people who are like prospective customers as well. And again, talk to them about their job, how they make stuff, how sheet metal factors in. And then the other thing you could do, the thing with podcasts I think are really important is speed matters a lot, and consumption, just like anything else, consumption. So don't make it too long. So I would keep your podcast to like maybe 15 to 25 minutes an episode. And then if you can't get a guest, I would go fire off a bunch of questions to your subject matter experts in Italy, have them answer it. And then I would, if I were you, I would just run that podcast myself and go over some best practices for sheet metal, to make little like 5 to 6 minute shorties.
Okay.
So that's one approach that I would do if I were you. So
Right.
I would basically make yourself the subject matter expert. So
Yeah. Okay.
I ran into this when I was working at Binzel, the welding company, because all of my subject matter experts are actually remote. We were based in Maryland, and I didn't have any of my sales guys or any of my engineers who worked in Maryland. They all were like in Michigan or Ohio. And so sometimes it would be months before I could get them in the office to do stuff. So I basically just went to them with questions and asked them a lot of questions about XYZ and how contact tips worked, or how nozzles worked, or what mattered about lightweight welding guns. And they would answer for me. And then I would just make that content myself and put my name on it. And sometimes you just got to do that out of necessity. So I know when that gets, when it gets like that, that's when you got to get resourceful and scrappy. And I think just, push through a little bit and just, put yourself out there. You'll surprise yourself with how much you'll learn about a topic when you have to be the subject matter expert, or become someone who can, fake it at least till you make it.
Speak to it. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can also bring in outside experts. I mean, I'm not an expert on your company, but for us, we're talking to sales and marketing experts, and Joe does this on his podcast all the time. We don't have all the expertise in house. There's a lot of things that our audience cares about that we don't know, but there's other people who are really good at it, and we bring them in and we share that expertise with our audience through our podcast, even though it's not us who have the expertise. So that's something to think about too.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. Laura, would you mind if I brought you on? I'm going to make Laura live and see if she will come on. Is she still there? There she is.
All right. Question from Laura was 2 questions. First, do you think if you've already invested in Premiere Pro, would that be a good platform to build videograms? Second, how would you recommend creating content that is entertaining but remains professional? So Laura, if you want to come on, then.
I got her on right now. Laura, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Hi. Thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Hello.
So are you using Premiere Pro already?
Yes, that's where I do my video editing.
So Premiere Pro is actually way better than any of these like paid for platforms, to be honest with you. I did not mention Premiere Pro because it's frankly just a harder platform to use. So if you have the technical chops to use it, I would say absolutely use Premiere Pro. You can mix in, I assume you know Adobe pretty well, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so mix in like Photoshop and Illustrator. You can put like Photoshop, Illustrator, and Premiere Pro together to do it. I'm not graphically, I don't have enough graphical design chops to do that. But Tyler, who was my creative at Binzel, he was a graphic designer by trade. And so that's exactly how he made our audiograms at Binzel. But so I think absolutely, if you have that ability to go for it, I will say it will take a little longer from my experience to do that because the captioning isn't as easy because you have to basically go caption it after the fact on Rev. But you can make more unique sort of visual experiences using it. On your question about creating content that's entertaining but professional, I would honestly look at your branding that you're going to use for some of that creative. So you're talking about making videograms. Think about how you can brand that videogram in a way that's eye-catching, and then let kind of the design creativity sort of create this mystique of entertainment around the content. I look at like what Jacob Hall, we mentioned him already, Jake Hall, the manufacturing millennial. I mean, his stuff is pretty entertaining, but like, I frankly think the fact that he's a cartoon in a suit and a Cubs hat on makes it a little more entertaining. So I would think about how you can leverage your creative capabilities to make that content more entertaining sort of when you're producing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I worry that it gets too colloquial sometimes and sounds too informal.
I mean, does your audience talk kind of that informally?
Most of our subject matter experts do. Actually, everyone's pretty conversational and casual in our shop. So
I would simply say, like, if that's how our subject matter experts talk, that's probably how our audience talks. So I would say being colloquial is actually good. This goes back to copywriting, Julian, which we've talked about before, but you should be writing like you talk and talking like you talk either. I don't think any company should shy away from the language of their industry. Obviously, don't make it profane or anything, but if it is colloquial, lean into that colloquialism. I think that's actually a good move.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. We had another question from Jennifer. How do you invite customers? Jennifer, I'm going to just bring you on real quick. Let's see. Hi, Jennifer. Can you hear us? Oh, she doesn't have a mic. Okay, that's okay. Not a problem. All right, so Jennifer asked about inviting customers to participate in a podcast. How much do you share about your plans for content? And you mean tone and channel. So I would always just sort of, I would usually, so I have a podcast, full disclosure. When I go, I share about my plans for the content. I go to whoever I want to interview. I tell them, look, we're doing a podcast. Once you on it, I usually line up like 6 to 8 questions. I usually put like 6 to 8 questions up for them. And then I say, look, if you have an interesting answer, I'm going to go off the board here and we're just going to kind of let it go and just sort of let that conversation go on its own volition. And then it's basically it. I mean, it's hard to get your podcast started, but I basically go to my customers and I basically tell them like, look, we're trying to basically be a better company. We'd like to elevate what you guys are doing, have you kind of educate our audience as well, since you obviously know so much about it. Like everyone wants to be an expert in some way, shape, or form and be noticed for that. So the podcast to me would be, if I were going to a customer and I wanted to bring them on, just tell them like, look, man, this is a chance for you to get noticed in your field. It also frankly helps people, it'll help them in their professional endeavor. Like I started a podcast and I was able to switch jobs twice and command more money for it, all because I started a podcast. I had a friend of mine who just got hired at a company. He was the product manager for a machinery company, and we had him on the podcast, and he was able to leverage that into 2 job offers and frankly was able to get the job he wanted. He was able to go move out to Arizona, which he's leaving for in a couple of weeks, and frankly just get the position you wanted. So there's ways to entice your customers to get on your podcast because there is something in it for them. It's not just for you to get content. I mean, they will benefit from it as well. Offer them a copy, say you'll make video and audiograms, you'll tag their company to give them some notice and some boost, some brand awareness. And I think all of that is beneficial. So that to me is kind of how I would approach the podcast with customers and get them on, and then how I would execute it. Does that make sense? Let me know if that answered your question. If you wanted something kind of more, just definitely just give me a little clarification. I'll try to answer. Do you have anything to add to that, Julian?
No.
No? Okay. Do you want to tackle Blake's?
Yeah. Any prior permission for having anybody on, like with waiver about sharing the content? That's probably more your forte, Matt. Blake, are we talking about podcasting specifically, about having people on and sharing what they say? Okay. I mean, Matt, I would say it's probably commonly accepted that when you go on a podcast that, what you say will be put out there, but let me know.
I've never had to offer a waiver about sharing content with anybody. And I've done marketers and stuff. Usually the person you ask to be on the podcast, they'll clear that themselves. So I had to, when I had Todd Clouser on, for instance, he cleared it with his president before he said yes to me. And then I'm going to have Jen Hartman from John Deere, who's their director of PR and social strategy. We're going to record next month. I'm really, really excited about that podcast. But she had to clear it with her boss, and they'll do that on their own. So you don't really need a waiver, in my opinion. We've done 30 episodes now. I've never had to ask anyone for a waiver. And I mean, Joe, I know you're listening here. If you can shed light on that, go ahead. Government agencies may be different. So government agencies might be a little bit of a different animal, and you may need to have a waiver of some kind, but I don't have any experience on that. I know going B2B, I haven't had to do that. Can't show vendor preference. Well, so the thing with the podcast, Jennifer, that I'd recommend, I didn't even mention this when we were talking about it. I would not brand that podcast like the Gorilla 76 podcast. Definitely make it more general. You're not creating that content to show vendor preference or anything. But I mean, you'll just bring them on and they'll just, again, talk to you about their subject matter expertise or anything of that nature. If you have big customers who do that, for the purposes of a testimonial, that can definitely get hairy. But again, you can just go down market to some of the smaller companies who maybe would be a little more willing to do that. All right. I don't see any other questions. Yeah, kind of like Industrial Marketing Live, Chris. Appreciate that. So we went hour 7 minutes, and that was awesome. Still got a good amount of people here. I just want to tell you all, first off, how much I appreciate you guys coming on and just giving us your time. We hope you find this valuable, because I know I'm taking an hour out of your guys' day, your work day for that matter. And so if you weren't getting value out of this, it would not be valuable to us either. So yeah, any other questions you guys have, feel free to shoot Julian or I just a DM on LinkedIn, and we'll get this recording out to you guys. And please, we got another webinar in a couple weeks on targeting audiences with LinkedIn and Facebook. We'll keep it really focused to the industrial sector. And hopefully we'll show you guys some tricks on how to do that and how to focus it. We'll get a little bit into measurement, I think. But otherwise, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Thank you all so much for joining us. And go kick butt, man. It's only Monday. You got 4 more days after this.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.